Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this planning meeting of Melton Borough Council. I am Councillor Alan Thwaites, Chair of Planning, and I will be chairing this meeting. Um, I think everybody knows the housekeeping by now, so there's no members of the public here, so we'll give that part a miss. But members speaking, please raise your hand if you wish to speak and speak directly to the microphone in front of you. Remember to turn it off once you have finished. There'll be no voting tonight, as we've only got one paper to actually note and discuss. I'd like to introduce those present this evening, and they are to my right, Councillor Mike Brown, who's a substitute for Councillor Allnutt, Councillor Ian Atherton, Councillor Ronan Brown, and Councillor Marion Gordon. To my left is Councillor James Mason, Councillor Margaret Glancy, Councillor Higgins, Councillor Holmes, and Councillor Pritchett. We have a team of officers present who are to my left, the Legal Services Manager, Tom Pickwell. To my right, the Planning Development Manager, Louise Parker, and Assistant Director for Planning, Sarah Legg. We also have our Democratic Services team present, assisting with the technology and taking the minutes, and that's Ellen Hange, Carol Bailey, and Sarah Evans. As I've mentioned, the apologies for absence tonight is from Councillor Allnutt. We also give apologies from Councillor Adcock. Councillor Mike Brown is in attendance as the substitute for Councillor Allnutt. So the second agenda item is the minutes of the last meeting held on the 12th of March. Do I have a proposer for the minutes? Councillor Mason and a seconder, Councillor Gordon. Do anybody have any comments they'd like to make about the minutes? No? In that case, then can I just take a vote on accepting the minutes as they have been published? All those in favour? It's unanimous and one abstention. I assume. Yeah, thank you very much for that. I'll sign those in a moment. The declarations of interest, I will say members to declare any interest as appropriate in respect of items to be considered this evening. But as I said, there's only one paper, which is the performance project. So I'm not sure there would be anybody that wants to declare an interest. No. So we'll move on. So as I said, this is a slightly unusual meeting in the fact that we're going to do a presentation on the planning productivity plan update, and then follow it with a discussion, a constructive discussion to actually move things forward, because we want to basically state where we are now, where we've got to, and then put in the process for continual improvement as we move forward. It's not saying it's all finished, it's not saying it's all there, but rather than stealing the thunder of Louise and Sarah, I'll hand over to Louise.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. Can we have the next slide, please? Okay, so the presentation sets out the journey the planning service has been on through the planning productivity plan, why it began, what actions were taken, where the service is now, and what happens next. It is intended to provide context for recent changes and to give members confidence that there is a clear, structured programme of improvement in place. Members will have seen operational changes recently and may also have heard differing views about what those changes mean. This update intentionally steps back to explain the fuller picture, the rationale for the PPP, the role SIM, which is short interval management, played within it, what has been learnt and how that learning is now being carried forward. This is about context and understanding, not about blame. Can I have the next slide, please? It's important to start with the wider context. Planning services across the country are under significant and sustained pressure. Recruitment and retention of planning officers is a well-recognised national challenge. Demand has continued to rise, and smaller authorities in particular are vulnerable when a small number of staff leave or are absent. These challenges are not unique to Melton. Against the national backdrop, we saw very real local impacts. Work in progress increased, backlog grew, officers were dealing with high volumes of avoidable contact, and productivity became increasingly difficult to sustain. These were national pressures, but with local consequences that meant doing nothing was not a viable or responsible option. Next slide, please. This wasn't the first attempt to improve performance, and that's important to acknowledge openly. What was different this time? This was a deliberate decision to move to an evidence-led improvement programme with external challenge, clear governance, and a focus on systems and processes rather than individuals. This work is owned corporately, not just by the planning service, and it aligns with wider organisational priorities around resilience, performance, and supporting growth. Next slide, please. The Planning Productivity Plan is not a single project or a one-off fix. It is a whole service improvement programme covering development management, quality of decision making, committee effectiveness, performance reporting, Section 106 monitoring, planning enforcement and support for growth and inward investment. SIM is one tool within the wider programme. It is not the programme itself. Next slide, please. So why SIM was used in development management? Short interval management was introduced as a time-limited operational intervention within the wider context of the Planning Productivity Plan. Its purpose was to stabilise throughput, reduce work in progress, protect officer determination time, and identify the systemic issues preventing productivity. It ran from December 2025 and finished this week in April 2026 and was always intended to end once that learning had been captured. Next slide, please. There's been some misunderstanding regarding short interval management, so this distinction really matters. SIM was a managed pause on uncontrolled demand and a structured learning phase. SIM was not a permanent operating model, and it was never intended to be. It was not about shutting down access, criticising officers, members, applicants or agents, or suggesting the service was broken. Next slide, please. So what SIM told us? SIM provided evidence rather than opinion. Productivity doubled, work in progress reduced every single week, and more decisions were made than applications received. Officers identified 176 specific issues. These were grouped into 30 themes. This showed clearly that the main constraints were structural, systems, validation, administration, rework, and uncontrolled inbound contact, rather than individual effort or commitment. Next slide, please. So what changed because of SIM? SIM was not simply a pause. It resulted in tangible action. Temporary management capacity was introduced. Targeted external support was used to deal with uncontentious cases, and investment was approved in IDOCS and uniform systems, which are our internal operating systems. Work also began on clearer validation rules, better use of customer services, improved in performance monitoring, and greater discipline around amendments and extensions of time. Next slide, please. SIM did not just stop. Exiting SIM required evidence of improvement, a documented exit strategy, and agreement on what would change and what discipline would be retained. This was a deliberate and planned transition, not a sudden withdrawal. Next slide, please. So where are we now? Post-SIM, the service is operating with greater control, clearer communication routes, and continued focus on reducing work in progress and maintaining productivity. One of the key risks identified was slipping back into old habits, which is why the post-SIM phase deliberately retains discipline around workload, prioritisation, and performance monitoring. This is a test and learn phase, not a return to old ways of working. Next slide, please. So what does this mean for members? Member engagement remains important and valued. Clearer protocols are designed to support fairness, transparency, and efficiency, and to make it easier for members to see what is happening without needing to intervene informally. Comments submitted through public access continue to be fully considered and form part of the formal planning record. Next slide, please. What has not changed? It is equally important to be clear about what has not changed. The Planning Committee continues to term applications, delegated decisions continue, and statutory planning processes remain in place. The Council has a 5-year housing land supply, an adopted local plan, and a submitted local plan update. The service has challenges, but it is not broken. Next slide, please. So, ending short interval management does not mean stopping improvement. Immediate actions include commencing post-SIM testing, maintaining disciplined workload management, recruiting to increase administrative and enforcement capacity, continuing process mapping, and maintaining reduced work in progress. Next slide, please. The next phase focuses on quality, confidence, and structure. This includes session with Planning Committee to agree shared service standards, setting out a clear what good looks like operating model, moving to a hosted iDoc system, and developing a planning performance dashboard. Next slide, please. What else continues in parallel? Alongside development management, improvement work continues on Section 106 monitoring, planning enforcement, pre-applications, planning and performance agreements, and support for growth and inward investment. Members will continue to have visibility through regular committee updates and member bulletins, so engagement happens through agreed transparent routes. Next slide, please. So why is this time is it different? This time is different because changes are based on evidence. There is strong officer leadership, member oversight, and a corporate ownership, and progress is monitored rather than assumed. Next slide, please. In summary, there were real challenges, some beyond local control. The Planning Productivity Plan provided a structured response. Short interval management created the conditions for improvement, and learning has been acted upon. The service is now in a more stable, disciplined position. Improvement work will continue and members will be kept informed. I'll now hand over to Sarah for some of the parallel work.
Thank you, Louise. So moving on to planning enforcement and the improvement work that's underway, if we can move on to the next slide, please. So planning enforcement is a separate but connected work stream within the wider Planning Productivity Plan. As members are aware, it also faces high demand and a mix of legacy cases alongside new allegations, which requires a more disciplined and prioritised approach, which focuses clearly on the harm created by the alleged issue rather than the volume of actual complaints coming through. If we can have the next slide, please. So in terms of what happens next for planning enforcement, those next steps include introducing a clearer triage and harm scoring approach. That will narrow reporting routes so cases contain sufficient information, increasing both the administrative capacity and bringing forward a revised enforcement policy, which will be presented to Cabinet in the future. A SIM-style approach is also being considered within the planning enforcement team to embed process improvements furthermore into that enforcement work. If we can have the next slide, please. Another section of work that's being undertaken alongside that wider planning productivity plan relates to Section 106. So Section 106 monitoring is separate but connected to that wider PPP work, and it's focused on strengthening capacity, the systems and the end-to-end process of Section 106 monitoring. The aim is to improve the transparency and consistency in how contributions are calculated, monitored, invoiced and spent. Can have the next slide, please. So in terms of engagement, the work involves close engagement with many departments across the council because Section 106 cross-cuts between the various departments. So that includes planning, finance and legal officers, but also as well as key external stakeholders such as the County Council, the NHS and the police. We've held large-scale process mapping workshops that have been used to improve the coordination and clarify the various roles and responsibilities from cradle to grave when it comes to Section 106. So from that, I mean right from the very beginning, where an officer is negotiating with a developer what might be possible through Section 106 to the point where a development is completed, and all of the steps in between. We can have the next slide, please. So in terms of the activity to date in relation to this part of the wider project, the significant activity has already taken place, including reviewing the live agreements, redesigning the monitoring tools, tracking payment triggers, and mapping that full Section 106 lifestyle, which has been a rather large process to do. A phased review of the agreements that are already in place has begun, starting with those less than 5 years old, to provide reassurance that the monitoring is actually resilient in the first place. If we can have the next slide, please. So in terms of the next steps for the Section 106 monitoring and processes, that includes working on the creating a monitoring officer role, implementing that new end-to-end monitoring process, strengthening the governance and reporting, and improving the tracking of the non-financial obligations as well as financial obligations, and developing supporting templates and guidance. And this work will continue to be reported to members as it progresses through the Oversight Board. Thank you. If we can have the next slide, please. So that forms the end of our presentation, and obviously we're happy to take any questions from members. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Before we sort of open it up, I'll just add some of my part to it as well, which is the Oversight Board that was mentioned in there consisted of Eddie Coverley and Lydia Riesling. Sorry, Lydia, if you're watching. Margaret, myself, as I said, and Natalie Jim joined the Oversight Board as well. So that's the people who was from 2025, can't remember when we started, and moving that forward and trying to oversee the project. And one of the reasons why the SIM actually took a little bit longer, because we wanted to see the exit strategy coming out of that before we moved on to the next step, so that we knew what was actually going to move next. What I'd like to do this evening is, one, get any thoughts and ideas from people, but it's mainly towards moving forward, making sure that we can take this and move forward, because the proof is always in the pudding. We haven't gone through this process, and we need to go through this process and understand it. And one of the things that we will be having in the planning meetings in the future is a report as we're going along to say what the process is and what the movements are. So there will be a continual update to that as we go through with each meeting. So, as I said, I'd like to open it up basically for any sort of comments on where it is, what their hopes are, what your hopes are, and what things that you think that we've missed. Because, as we said, this is a continual improvement. It's not meant to be the finished topic, but we need to go through from there. So, first of all, Margaret was the first one to put her hand up, so I'll pass over to Margaret.
Yes, we've been sort of involved in this for quite a while now, and we've asked some extremely pertinent questions, and things have sort of changed due to those questions. So it is definitely a joint members and officers outcome that we've got before us. But there is one question that I would ask, and I've read through and I haven't found it. So if I've missed it, I apologise in advance. When you mentioned about putting all inquiries through members' inquiries, is there a time frame to receive a response for that? Because we all know that if we make an inquiry, a lot can happen in 9 days, 2 weeks, and sometimes it needs to be nipped in the bud.
No, there isn't a specific time frame as yet. The focus was setting up that channel to allow that communication to come through. But what we'll then do is work on refining that and setting up service level agreements and response times for that.
Another question, one thing that we were all quite, well, me in particular, keen on were the workshops for large developments. We found those extremely useful. Will they still continue?
There's been no changes to that. I mean, they are case by case and when they're needed. So at the minute, when the next one comes up, we can review that.
I'll add to that and so say yes. You know, I'm very keen on it, and I think we've got one Tuesday. This whole yeah, the dreaded topics. But Councillor Browning.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just going through reading the document that's also been appended to the. It's not clear to me on what the KPIs, how we're going to measure KPIs. What are those KPIs going to be? Both quantitative and then there's also qualitative as well. You know, how staff are performing, etc. Individuals will be different. That's not clear in the documentation. Communications as well with how we communicate and the new ways of working with the developers, the parish councils, etc. is not clear. That's the second point. The third point is that, and I've seen this in practice myself today, where an officer's just come back and said, just look at it yourself. Some of it's all right saying that to members, but you have to remember we all operate at different levels and our IT's all different skill levels, etc. That needs to be a recognition. I think that some people will need help, like any member of the public may need more help than another member of the public. So I think to say, well, you can just go and look at it yourself. There'll be information sat within documents that, yeah, I might be able to go and look at it. I may not be able to if I don't know what it is, where it is. So I think there needs to be an appreciation that, you know, we are here, we are governing the organisation, and we will need support to govern that organisation. So they're the 3 points initially that I just want to make, and if you've got any response to those, please.
Yes, thank you. Very relevant comments. So in terms of KPIs, it's assessing the information that we're finding at the moment with the evidence coming forward. Once we feel that we have relevant KPIs in place, they'll be presented to the Oversight Board for their consideration. In terms of comms, I think that's a very relevant point. One of the things that we're looking at to advance quite quickly is sessions with agents. So an agents forum, which is mentioned within the report that we've presented, and also doing something similar with parish councils as well. So absolutely take on board those comments regarding communication. In terms of the responses that are being given, we are trying to increase the use of self-service, but we are very much aware that it is not a case of one size fits all, and there will be people that need some additional information. So yeah, we are very much aware of that.
Councillor Higgins.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I've written quite a lot about this. I'm not going to say it all, and I'm more than happy to send it in as well. But just for the record, I support meaningful reform and improved productivity in planning, and nobody wants the officers bombarded with avoidable emails, duplicated queries, or informal chasing. And a more disciplined system is sensible. But productivity cannot come at the expense of democratic accountability. A ward councillor is not simply another member of the public, and members bring local knowledge, case history, residents' concerns, and on some occasions can identify when something has been misunderstood or missed. The papers do not yet strike that balance. They are not strong on restricting contact, but much weaker on setting out a proper model for fair member engagement on contentious or sensitive applications. I'll just talk, even though I'm sitting here as a planning member, as the Somerby ward member, we've had a solar farm application. I've gone to one parish meeting with about 100 people who attended. More or less, their objections were the same. And if they had confidence in me to put their views forward, because as a democratically elected member, you are there to make sure their voice is heard within the council, as been said before, of governing the council, they then have the confidence that you have their voice in that room for them. Now, it may be that as the ward member, you don't agree with that particular view, or it doesn't carry as much weight in the planning balance. but their voice needs to still be heard. And equally, that one objection could be the matter of difference. And I'm not going to go into a specific case, but there was an incident in my ward where the officer at the time, who has left the authority, had got it completely wrong. And now the appeal that happened on that site had been found in favour of the council and the residents' views. That's not always the case. But equally, my concern is that this risks eroding the democratic mandate by sidelining members from the service rather than improving how members and officers work together. In my own experience, there have been occasions where earlier engagement, as I was mentioning earlier, with the local member could have saved time and effort, because getting a matter right first time is more efficient than having it to correct it later. So my point is this: yes to reform, yes to productivity, and yes to stopping bombardment of officers. And I will say this for all members of the 28, which I'm one of them. I would like to think that from time to time, a member should conduct themselves properly. And I'm saying this to colleagues here. That isn't a case of bombarding the officer. And equally, you might or not always hear what you want to hear. But just because most members, or maybe all members, conduct themselves in a good manner, just because on an occasion where a member may not conduct themselves in that manner of, in a professional manner, to not bombard the officer, that does not mean we should write the rules to that lowest common denominator. It is not a culture where legitimate member engagement is treated as part of the problem, and good reform should improve both efficiency and democratic involvement and not weaken one in the name of the other. I'll come to the 6 points and then I'll pass back just ever so quickly. So my reading is this: the service has a legitimate case for stopping a scattergun contact. I really support that. The papers, however, flatten in the important distinction of chasing, which is not the same as member representation. The documents lean heavily, which has been published, this document that's been published leans heavily towards administrative equality, not democratic proportionality. And I didn't write how the planning system works, that's Parliament. Member awareness proposals are especially weak. The papers risk implying that challenge itself is part of the problem, and the governance architecture is top-heavy and not obviously ward-facing. Now, and then just to put this, the productivity case is real, and the member engagement model is underdeveloped and overly defensive. So what I would like the committee, and maybe yourself, Chair, and everyone for listening, is to maintain efficiency and proper audit trails, discover unnecessary officer contact, discourage unnecessary officer contact, provide appropriate route for legitimate ward member engagement on significant or contentious applications, and better recognise the representative and democratic role of elected members within the planning process. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thanks. Before we come to you, Councillor, I think that's one of the things for me, the moving some of the initial contact, through the email, the members' email, into planning, gives us some of that formality, and the fact that it's registered, you get the number back, you got it recorded, so you know what's going through. So doing it 20 times doesn't make it any better. But one of the things I wanted to ask you back really was, so how do you actually see that prioritisation working? Because we've all got wards and we've all got our own priorities and we've all got our own levels of what we think is important and not important, and it is that difficult case of, with the planning team, how do you actually understand those priorities within there, and how do you actually give the level that you think it deserves, or the ward thinks it deserves, or whatever, because that is the difficulty, and that's the way part to put through it. And part of the reason for making sure we try and restrict that initial contact is because we're trying to get the most out of the most expensive resources we've got and use them on the most important things. So, but a quick question before I come back to some of the other ones: how would you actually see that prioritization or that triaging work in practice?
Well, I think it's about trust, and that's why I put a large part of what I said. It was addressed to members, all 28 of us. We need to have trust and faith in the officers, and equally as a ward member, I'd like to think with the planning team, I don't come to the planning team over every application. For example, as I said, solar farms, very contentious. Please keep me informed as it goes through. I know what the government says about solar farms, so I know where that's likely to go. I can have that honest debate with my residents. For example, though, you could have one application and it is very highly contentious. If I say it's contentious, and I'm not saying, oh, everything's priority one, but we have to also trust the member to evaluate it fairly. Now, if everything goes through member inquiries, and what I worry about is we're already going through one officer to go back to the case officer. And so that's taking 2 resources up. Now, if a member is abusing or bombarding the process, there are other ways of working that through groups, group leaders, mentorship, on that. But we shouldn't do it through the lowest common denominator, because what I found is if I've got a contentious application and the planning process is going away from residents, starts resulting in complaints, which we've had, that ties more resources up, and to a point where as a ward councillor I've had to say to my residents, put in a complaint. Now, if I've lost the faith in that, and that's the only option I have as the ward member, that's causing more resources elsewhere in the council. And so I think we should trust officers. As members, we should trust our officers, but equally officers and the planning officers should be able to trust us as ward members too.
I understand that. Councillor Atherton and then Councillor Home.
Thanks, Chair. So I've got 3 points. Really, the first kind of ties into something Councillor Higgins has just talked about, and it's to do with inquiries. The information we've been given, both in the report and in the email that came out, which instructed us on how to do things moving forward, which was quite useful because I used it almost straight away. Talks about us not contacting desk officers. Doesn't talk about initial contact. It says don't contact the desk officer. Then goes on to say if you want to talk to a desk officer, book an appointment. Doesn't tell you how to book an appointment if you can't talk to the desk officer. So there's a gap there. What I don't want to be doing is emailing a general email bucket asking for an appointment, only then to play email ping pong. In that case, at least we should be able to get hold of the desk officer, sort out diaries, and arrange an appointment. And I have no problem with booking an appointment rather than scattergun. The second issue I've got is something that was said in response to a question, the written response to a question at last council, and indeed something that Louise mentioned today, that SIM didn't mean that the department was closed. The evidence I have is it very definitely was closed. I sent a query in asking for an update on a particular planning application during SIM. The email exchange terminated in quite abruptly when I was told that the applicant just has to wait. And I'm sorry, that just wasn't acceptable. So the evidence before me is that the department, if it wasn't closed, certainly appeared to be closed, and that applicant still hasn't got the answer to his query. And it's one of the queries I've raised since the new instruction, so it's in the system. That ties into the self-service question query that Councillor Brown raised. The query that I've just talked about was one of the things inside it was to confirm who the desk officer is for the applicant. The response I've got back is go and look on the portal, to paraphrase. Well, if you look on the portal and read all the documents, and I detailed it in the original query, there are 2 desk officers named. And if you phone up the one that's the most recent that the applicant has spoken to before, the voice on the voicemail, the recording, is a different person again. So when we're asking for clarification of who the desk officer is, go and look it up yourself. It doesn't really answer my question. So as Councillor Higgins said, I'm all for improvement. I think we're at early days yet. It's day one to all intents and purposes. I've got a few inquiries in the system already, sent on the 7th, received on the 8th. I don't quite understand how that is when it's done by email. Initial response telling me they've got them dated today, the 9th. So there's a 24-hour gap between reading it and responding it. So there are some improvements straight away that can be made. Even if the initial response to say we've got it is automatically generated, to say it's there and it's in the system, it doesn't need a person to do that. That holding response could be auto-generated. Other than that, I wait with bated breath to see the actual improvements.
Before I hand over to Louise, I mean, I say, when you say they were closed, no, if you look at it for the first time in several years, the actual backlog is going down. So that, no, they weren't closed from that point of view. They may be closed from the talking to them sort of.
I appreciate all of that, but the impression given from the outside looking in is that it very much was closed.
Yeah, and I'm sure we've all got ward councillors that have said I'm still waiting for stuff and all the rest of it. But that's we've got to, yeah, we're all in that position. The point about talking to the desk officer or the appointments, my understanding, and I thought that's what the report said, was that basically it would be the desk officer that would be contacting you to make the appointment if they felt it was necessary, or they felt they couldn't answer it via their email. But I'll pass over to Louise to answer properly.
Thank you. Yes, so the member inquiry process is detailed within the report, and in there it does say that if you require an appointment, you do it through member inquiries, so they can do that for you. I think I need to be really clear, the service was not closed. It may have appeared closed, but it was not closed. Applications were coming in, decisions were coming out. We were very clear from the outset when we briefed members back in December, I think it was, that there were things that we had to change to actually make the sustained improvements. And one of those things that we had to change was not responding to chase-ups, and that had to be a purposeful decision to allow the concentrating on the decisions to get the numbers down. So I just wanted to make that point really clear. There's also the planning portal for the application search. There is a section on there that gives the case officer. I don't know how that you've got the 2 case officers, I'm not sure, but I think if we're going into individual circumstances, we'll probably take them out of the meeting, which I'm happy to do.
Just before I come to you, Elaine, Tom wanted to add something, as it was his baby.
Apparently. So yeah, the member inquiry system is quite a new system. It is evolving. It's still sort of going through, and it's a system that was built up from the ground upwards. So one of the things we said as we were developing it, we want to see what works and actually what do we need to add to it. So one of the things we've taken away is actually we could do with a bit of an SLA type thing to say it will be acknowledged within X amount of time. So what we've done is looked at things like the request for information protocol and the complaints protocol. So they're already well established, and they set out, and the complaint will come in. It will be acknowledged within X time, and it'll be responded to in X time. We haven't quite got to that stage yet, recognising that the range of inquiries is really broad, and actually some inquiries will be really straightforward to answer. They can be answered there and then. Some might take longer. They might require meetings. So that's why we don't have a time on that yet. I'm happy to pick up with you after on that specific one. But the way it works is the inquiry is received on the next business day if it's received at business hours. So the example you've given, I see it came in at 5:20. So the admin officer then picked set it up, it was classed as being received the next day. They then responded to you the day after to say it had been received on the 8th, but it looks like it was first thing in the morning on the 9th. So one of the things we're looking at is how long that acknowledgement takes, but it looks like it was one business day after. So lots to take away. We're grateful for any feedback on that, because it's part of a wider system anyway. And yeah, if there's any specific inquiry, I'm happy to have a chat with them after or now as well.
No, I'm quite happy with that, and I'm content for any comments about an application to go through the public forum, so that they're logged and then do appear on the planning portal. I would ask though that the documents that we get, the reports that we consider as part of the planning team, also appear on the planning portal, because currently they don't.
Their comment, Councillor Holmes, and then Don.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So one or two things here, which, well, first of all, I read this backwards, forwards, and everywhere, and we now know that it is only the beginning, because what I've written here very badly, I could be a doctor really. I am very disturbed from what I have read. I am disturbed. I thought we were going to probably go into private session, because then there are various things like enforcement I feel we ought to go into private session for. I worry that in somewhere in here, which Louise, you said something about not taking on every application. Well, when you live in the countryside, there very often are one application. To me, one application is as good as 1,000 houses. Doesn't make any difference. I can't see why. In some ways, I can see that it's a good idea. You make an appointment to speak to somebody. But why not just literally do the thing that we used to do? And we don't, it's not that modern, that we actually ring up an officer and ask them a question. We're not talking all day. We just want to ask something, and it's asked and it's finished. Why can't we do that? To me, we're going around this, and we're finding with portholes here and this and that and the other. But all we want to know is to ask a question. So many times I get the problem with planning all the time, and people listening to this, because there will say, you're right, we do. They're always asking me. I can't, and so that's one of the reasons I would like to go into private session, because I think we can be easier then. But another thing that I've always thought, my colleagues probably don't agree with me, but all this business of working from home, officers want to be most of the time in these offices. It's something that big businesses are making their workforce do, and I think it is essential. You go upstairs, it's like the Morris 11.
Sorry, we're moving outside of planning.
Yeah. Well, this is planning. This is I'm talking about for planning officers. Anyway, we'll leave it there, and then hopefully we will go into private session. Thank you.
And well, as I promised earlier, once we've closed the meeting, I'm more than happy to stay around and to discuss anything in particular. There's 2 points you made though. That one, there's 26 councillors. If every one of those wants to ring up every time we've got an application, that just kills the planning officers off. It means they're spending their time on the phone and not doing the work that we need them to do, the expensive work they need to be doing. The one thing I can't allow is examples that have just been recently where a councillor took an hour and a half of a planner's time for an application that wasn't actually a full application, as I understand it. So the amount of money that costs us as ratepayers is phenomenal. Yes, but sometimes the officers find it difficult to challenge members in that way, and if they, if the support isn't there to do. So, I mean, that's the other side to your argument. I understand what you're saying, and so we've all got to go through that sort of process. You did make another point there, which I've actually forgot. The working in the office, that we have a difference of opinion on that, and we've discussed that many times in the past, that people working from home and that sort of thing. I think it is down to how we actually transact and how we actually. Yes, I understand that. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, as we'll hold a session after the meeting. Yeah. Sorry, Tom, did you? Yeah, go on.
Yeah, it was just something that I probably should have added on before. So one of the things that we looked at with the member inquiry system, and that's a general system, not just for planning, that although mainly for planning at the moment, is it gives directors the ability to track all of those inquiries as well. So sometimes if a member raises a query before, and there was lots of different ways of coming in, there was no central way to be able to log that. This now gives directors that direct overview, so they can see all of the inquiries that are coming in, and that also allows them to see, actually, is there something that members are often asking for that we can be more proactive about? So that's constantly going to be reviewed. And the other benefit is that when group leaders have their meetings with the senior leadership team, they can look at some of those things as well. So if members are finding that they're not getting responses to their queries, rather than members having to pull all of that together, we can quickly triage now and find that information. So if, for example, you'd raise lots of inquiries and you just weren't getting anywhere, it's much easier for us to have that. So sometimes that central allocation, and it isn't perfect yet, there's still more work to be done, will hopefully add lots of benefits too. So still evolving. So we do really welcome any feedback with that. But the idea is for it to be able to help officers, but really to help members as well with those inquiries.
Yeah, sorry, go on, Don.
Just after tonight for my group, I'll be putting a note out about the new process. We're working for general inquiries, and member inquiries has been working with Tom due to the fact that we had a situation where the MP wasn't being responded to, and we implemented as a trial a situation where the MP's office sent the queries in, and that's worked really, really effectively, where we can track everything by number and not lose them, etc. Obviously, I'll appreciate other groups that want to work their own way, but that's what we're going to try and do and work with the officers. The planning stuff, quite rightly, is a secondary consideration coming on the back of this, but I will speak to us all on Monday, and what I want to say is we're going to try and give it a go and see how it works.
Thank you, appreciate that, and Councillor, I appreciate your patience in waiting.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll come in with my own points later, but for now, I'd like to thank Councillor Higgins for a very eloquent and comprehensive summary of this particular area of the document. For me, it's about getting it right, the decision right, and sometimes we might not like that one. And there's a difference between clarity, seeking clarity, and having an opinion that you need to put in the comments section. And where I do feel, I feel for the councillor who is not necessarily on the planning committee and doesn't read local plans and everything, and they get housed in somebody's garden and 50 people objecting and they're frightened to death. How are they helped? I think that needs to be considered in sensitively in the process, I think, on that. But I'll come in with my things later, because I think everybody's raised it, and I'll have a look at it in practice and I'll sit down and look at it.
And I did remember the part that I forgot from Councillor Holmes was you mentioned enforcement, and I'll add that Councillor Pritchett, Councillor Mason, and myself sit on a sub board for enforcement and working with that early stages and all the rest of it. But it already seen, and I'm sure Councillor Mason and Councillor Pritchett will actually say the desire for them to actually move their service forward and move that going forward. Can't talk about it, but I know there's some current ones which are actually being quite the system's starting to move and starting to change. And again, it's like all of it. We've got to wait and see to make sure it happens. Councillor Brown.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. One of the useful things about waiting and listening to everybody else, they say most of what was in your mind before it comes to you. And I'd just like to say that, I mean, yet again, spookily, Councillor Higgins and I are on a wavelength. It seems to happen, very frequently over the last 3 years. And also, I'd like to echo what Councillor Pritchard has said. When I read the document, I'm comfortable with the member inquiry system being laid out there in most circumstances. It did strike me that it's designed, and I'm not going to name names here, but I didn't recognise myself in the way I engage with officers in what was clearly being addressed, and I think probably most of the members in this room would say the same. But there is a danger you waited too much to deal with some specific flashpoints and impact negatively on the way the wider group of members engage with the department. And I think Councillor Pritchard's point is particularly pertinent because, I mean, I'm a substitute. I don't sit on planning on a regular basis. But some members face with the sort of situation he suggested need some help and support. They want to pick up the phone and say, look, I don't know how to approach this, who do I talk to? So I think within this, there needs to be that line of communication, not bombarding every member of the planning department, but if we can build into the member inquiry system an opportunity, an avenue that would allow that, I think it would be very helpful. I wanted to touch on one other thing, if I may, which is about staffing. And you mentioned in the presentation the intention to, in the summer, you're working on job description for Section 106 monitoring officer, and of course the issue of staffing is more generally a challenge within planning. And I was just mindful that the other challenge we're facing as a council in the coming period is LGR. And whilst no decisions have been taken yet, that is going to have an impact in terms of how the council approaches staffing in the coming period. For instance, over temporary, fixed term, etc. I just wonder whether that's been factored into your thinking on how that you would manage that, because it's clearly it's a different proposition to advertise a job as a job as opposed to it's fixed term or it's temporary. I don't know whether that's been given any thought.
Thank you, Chair, if I can take that one. So there are 1 or 2 roles in the existing planning team that are permanent roles that need to go out to recruit for, that we understand will be done as permanent roles. The Section 106 monitoring officer post, we need to design up and actually create that as a role as it is. As to exactly whether that would be recruited on a permanent, temporary basis or anything, no, we haven't got that far yet, but rest assured we are making those considerations when we are deliberating about that. It is going to be an incredibly challenging role to fill. They are rare people, and we want to get the right person in to do that job, and that's why we need to take some care and consideration to make sure that job description accurately reflects the kind of person that we need in that role as well. But the starting point would be to recruit first before making any decisions as to whether we do something different. But yeah, we'll be considering about whether it's temporary or permanent.
Thank you. Councillor Gordon.
Yeah, this is just a scenario. If, for instance, a councillor found something on the ward and it needed seeing to and they wanted to get the officer to come out, go through the process, but instead of the officer, they decide to send somebody else, that's perhaps the next layer down, and they decide that nothing should be done. But the councillor knows that there is something to be done. Now, that inquiry could be closed by that person that come out to see it, but you still want an officer to come out to verify what it is you're saying. Does that mean you can't do that because that inquiry line has now closed? Can you still go ahead and go in again and get an officer to come out?
And it depends. Are we talking about an application or an enforcement issue? Or
No, not really. What I'm thinking of is just something that's come up, say like there's a park and there's flooding. You know, the park gets, a children's park, play park, and it needs to be sorted out and things like that. But you want the officer to come out, and would that? It's just a scenario. It's just an example. Would that inquiry be then closed and you couldn't take it any further?
do you want to take it, Louise?
So the role of a planning officer is to assess and determine planning applications. So based on that, I'm not entirely sure where the role for the officer would come into. But if there's a application specific inquiry that needs an officer, then if there was a visit, it would be the planning officer that made the visit, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I know years ago, a planning officer did come out to see something that I wanted to show him, and an actual planning officer did come out. And I was wondering, so that's not the case so much now, is that right?
No, I think there was what Louise is saying, that, I mean, if it's down to a particular application, I mean, at the end of the day, you always have the right to call it in. So, I mean, I don't think it can be closed in that way unless it's been determined for other reasons or whatever. So I don't think it's that some of the other things you're just talking about there is more the general type things, which is what Tom was implying earlier, which is sort of looking at all the other areas to sort of say how we do this. And so this is just purely for planning at this moment in time. So that's something that would actually sort of move forward with. Yeah, thank you. Councillor Higgins, you next, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Glancy just said something. I think you probably should raise that point. So it's quite refreshing to sit as a planning councillor at a planning committee and actually talk more about the democratic value of a council. As you know, when we sit here determining applications, it's not what our personal views are and all the other stuff. But I do want to get across the democratic part of this authority, because it's a place shaping authority, because it's the planning authority. Each and every councillor, 28 councillors, and all those who are in place shaping authorities. Some of my best achievements and proudest achievements of being a councillor for the years I've been a councillor have been those ones where I've had engagement with the planning officer, and I've always, even if it was in my ward, while I was on this authority before the protocol that you couldn't vote on your own ward, I always sat and represented from the ward and spoke on behalf of the ward. And some of I've managed to get voluntary Section 106 agreements in, because I worked with the community, the parish council, the developer and the planning officer at the time to get something that was more pertinent to my villages, my ward, my residents, and that is listening to all those stakeholders and working productively with the planning officer. And that's where I was saying earlier, if we can work productively with that planning officer, I don't think I'd ever achieve that through just purely through email or members' inquiries. And I think what I'm saying to everybody here is that's the power of being a member of Melton Borough Council, that is in our hands as an elected member to get that voice through there. And I would be very, very reticent. And in fact, I'd be, well, not just reticent, I would absolutely not support anything that started to take that voice or erode that voice away just in the name of productivity. Because I think place shaping and productivity can be one of the two same things.
I absolutely agree, and you know that beyond the scenes, I absolutely agree with what you're saying, and the power of what the ward councillor should to input within that, and that's as Councillor Glancy mentioned earlier, the meetings with the developers on the larger ones, because there isn't a one size fits all in planning, as we all know, and so those developer meetings, the early meetings to talk about the way it should be shaped or whatever, I think is one of the best things that I've seen in planning as we've gone through in the last 4 or 5 years, or 3 years. Well, 3 years, it feels like 4 or 5. But it's, sorry.
Yeah, and I think, you know, all of the discussion that's going on, it is really helpful because it's not about stopping the positive elements or the input of ward members or the value that you add to the community and the democratic system. None of this is about that. It's about how we channel that correctly so members get the support that they need, but officers also get the information coming in from one source and triage, so it's them that needs the information and them that responds to it. So it's just about managing the communication more effectively rather than stopping it.
Councillor Atherton.
Thank you, Chair. Having raised queries, the bit that's missing from the process is who and how is a case then closed? Because you get a query number, case number, great. There might be 2 or 3 emails exchanged. Perfect. Might be a phone call, it might be a meeting. What worries me, having been on a service provision side in a past life, is if you're not careful, the service provider closes the case when they think it's closed, rather than the person making the inquiry agreeing that the case should be closed. Can we ensure that in the closure process, it's a mutually agreed decision to actually shut the case down, please?
I'll give that to Tom just before I come to Councillor Glancy. Tom.
Thank you. Yeah, no, absolutely. So we'll take that away, and I've made some notes of other things to look at. So, like I said, it'll be an evolving system, so lots to look at. And one of the other things I've noticed is the escalation. So I think, Councillor Gordon, what you were saying. So if actually you weren't satisfied, what could happen? That's probably wider than planning matters in general. So yeah, I've noted it down. Don't have an answer for you yet, but let me take it away, have a think, and then we'll get in touch with him and see where we go from there.
Thanks, Tom. Councillor Glancy.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Higgins mentioned about productivity and how we work together with planning officers. But I think this, as I've always said, this needs to be at a very early stage, because it often irons out a lot of the problems with the development, which is why I'm super keen on having these workshops, or whatever we call it, design workshops. That's what, when I was chair, that's what I brought in. But it irons out the problems. But also, if we don't iron those problems out, what will happen? There will be an increase in call-ins due to the valid material consideration. So we need to have that conversation early in the day, because local members have local knowledge. And I think it's extremely important that we never forget that.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. Councillor Holmes and then Councillor Pritchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like I said, I think it probably ought to be in camera, but anyway, never mind. There are 500 and something outstanding, aren't there, in here that you've done quite well. You've got down to that amount. So that means then that everybody that's put an application in, it's with money, isn't it? Where, you know, it costs money to do an application. So what has happened to that money? Where is it? Because, so do I take it that the money is for enforcement, or, you know, what's, it's people's money we're talking about. And I know somebody who hasn't heard yet, and it's an extra thing, and it's a £7,000. You know, it's not like a little bit. I just wonder where it's gone.
Just before I hand over to Louise to answer some part of that, I mean, the 539 that are in there, you've got to remember that's not all ones that are just waiting there. They're waiting for things like consultees or whatever. So it is work in progress and sort of things moving on. And like you said, it is one of the big achievements in the fact that it's gone down for the first time. Well, I've been elected anyway. You know, so those things will happen, and some of those will probably be there for a long, long time. You know, there's applications that are sitting there waiting for different triggers or whatever. So they will sit there. But I'll pass over to Louise on some of the other parts of your question.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the update we've provided tonight and the changes we've made don't change that situation at all. So planning fees are set nationally. A planning fee is received when an application is submitted, and then through that, the application will be assessed and a decision will be issued. That doesn't change as part of this. This service will still be provided for that fee.
The fee has gone in there, hasn't it? So what happens to the money then?
Well, the money goes into paying for the department. That's always the same. It's never changed. That's always been the same. There's nothing changed within that process.
But you can
however long
understand
the
why
planning has
people get
been
terribly
in
upset,
operation.
can't you? You can.
Okay. Councillor Pritchett, and then.
Thank you, Chair. 5 questions going forward. Picking up on the talk that Louise gave, said you're designing performance indicators. Do you have a plan of where you want to be in 2 months, 4 months, 6 months, 8 months, and the work stages that are going to go through to actually measure the performance against? That's my first question.
Yes, so the original Cabinet report in November 2024 set out where we wanted to go, and then through the work streams that we've designed, we've then got the vision, which comes into August, summer this year, and then through that we will get the KPIs in place that go through the planning dashboard that we're going to create as well.
Create the dashboard, but you haven't got a plan of where you want, what work you want doing in the next 2 or 4 months. Where you're going, have you involved any planning experts in where you're going? I know you've got Mondrum in, and I'm thinking about, have you done any benchmarking? Those councils that were in a poor position that got themselves out of it, how they did it. Have you had recourse to anything like that? That's the second question.
It's okay, Chair. So just to give a little bit of background in terms of how we procured the support through from Mondrum. So there was obviously the Cabinet report in November 2024 that secured the funding on the basis of the work streams that were set out to proceed with the planning productivity plan. Though because of the level of the amount of procurement that we were doing, that was run through a formal tender process that was supported by Welland Procurement. On the basis of those work streams that we wanted to support with, and Mondrum were the people who put in the winning bid essentially on that was scored appropriately on the back of that. They are not planners by trade, but their trade is planning productivity and bringing struggling planning services back essentially to the point where they're performing. And part of their bid was demonstrating exactly what they'd done elsewhere with other planning services to make that happen essentially. In terms of KPIs, there's clearly the what we call PS1s and PS2s that are national benchmarkings that we report on a quarterly basis that go into government, and they're also reported through the council's corporate reporting system. So that sets the upper benchmark of it. We're having weekly updates on that work in progress that's coming through to us, that's being reported then internally and then to the oversight board as well. And as we're moving through this process, we'll be designing up further KPIs, key performance indicators, that we want to put through corporate performance reporting. Would you like to add anything?
I mean, I'll leave that one. I'm not convinced. The next one is more of a comment. With the unitary authority in 2 years' time, and any increased involvement of decisions that the government says officers can make, then there's got to be quite some improvement here in that. And then the final point is temporary staff, contractors. If you can't keep bums on seats, temporary staff, then there will be a problem. Now, some have come and gone, you know, and the nature of the contractor is possibly short-term, transient, better offers. But is there any way you've looked into any exit interviews or got any sort of means of getting stability in terms of numbers of staff?
Yeah, so one of our processes, obviously, it's disappointing when people leave, and we look at the reasons why they leave. You'll note from the very first slide that I put on the screen, the challenges for planning nationally in terms of recruiting planners, training planners, etc. So those issues are not just centralised to Melton.
I mean, I'll add to that if you do look at, sorry, Sarah, come back to you. If you do look at the people that did leave, where they left and where they went to, which is the bigger authorities, which have got the bigger salaries, etc. So, I mean, I think that's got to be part of it. But Sarah.
Thank you, Councillor Thwaites. So in terms of permanent staff, yes, there are exit interviews that are undertaken. That's a formal basis that's done with every member of staff that leaves, and at the present time, we are seeing people generally wanting to leave to go to existing unitary authorities, so they don't have to go through the local government reorganisation process. When it comes to agency staff, we recruit agency staff on a particular length of contract. However, those contracts do still only set about a 1 week notice on either side. So quite often, and we get emails every single day from agencies telling us about the CVs of other people who are elsewhere, because that's what the agencies do. They're trying to get higher prices for their agency staff and pull them out of one place and put them into another. So whilst we do our absolute best and we run a fair recruitment process when we go out to recruit agency staff, and we tell them how long we want them for, how long we've secured funding for, it is still within their decision if they decide after 10 weeks of a 16-week contract that they want to leave within 1 week because they've been offered something better elsewhere. And sadly, that's what we end up with.
Thank you. You've answered all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Higgins.
Thank you, Chair. It was just a quick point, just because we mentioned agency, and obviously with local government review is some of the benefits of agency staff. You're not paying sick pay, holiday pay, employer national insurance, all the other stuff. So it's all right saying here's the headline of the daily rate, but all the on costs of a member of staff as well. And I think that gets missed when people keep quoting agency staff, commentators and things like that. Equally, you don't have to pay them redundancy if an authority ceases to exist. So eventually that's still going to start to run through business decision making of authorities, and that's just going to be a very pragmatic decision making process that authorities and employees and agency workers will have to think about. So we should just go, oh, agency bad, permanent good. There's always a flexible balance of that in any workplace.
But I will add to that one of the key things that I try to put into this process as well is the fact that we should be building people and using it as a vehicle to actually produce more people working within the environment. But I understand exactly what you're saying. But at the end of the day, this area will still need a planning function, and that's where one of the key objectives right at the beginning of this was making sure that we had something that was fit for purpose, that could actually then transition somewhere else and keep that knowledge, that process going in. So we have got that in as part of a view. Were there any other positions? Councillor Gancy, sorry.
Sorry, me again. Just picking up on the point that Councillor Holmes made. It's very valid, actually, but applicants paying for a service and then we have delays in decisions, and that's one of the very reasons why we embarked on this planning productivity plan, to make things better. So we did acknowledge that. I think everyone was on the same page, so that's why we're doing it. And as agency staff, we need planning officers. If we can't get permanent staff, then we have to have agency. But on a plus side, agencies do bring with them a lot of wealth and skills and expertise from various places that they've been, good practices, and sometimes we do learn from them. So I think it's really good. I remember we had 1 or 2 agency staff in the past who have been absolutely excellent, and they have nurtured some of the younger planners that we had. So yes, I mean, I think it's a win-win if we can get permanent staff who bring with them the wealth of experience, brilliant. And also if we can get agencies to come, but there's such a shortage in the country. We're not the only authority experiencing this.
Councillor Atherton.
So just to summarise for myself then, Chair, thank you for this session. I found it useful and encouraging that my concerns and reservations are not just mine, but they're shared amongst a lot of us. And I thank the team for taking away the points that we've raised. But could I ask that we do a repeat session in say 6 months to review how the changes have gone and whether we continue down the same route or whether we need to alter, but to give it a good 6 months, otherwise we'll never know. Thank you.
I appreciate. Oh, sorry, Councillor Mason.
Ever been asleep, Margaret? Unaccustomed to this room is people listening, and I've listened. Yeah, it's very good. Listened to all the debate, and I was latterly posted onto this committee, much against my better judgment, I have to say. I wanted to be the critical friend, but unfortunately, I'll perceive sometimes as a critical enemy. But there we go. That's just another iron in the fire that I have. But very much listening to this debate, this has gone very much the way I thought it would go tonight. Largely, a lot of the debate is around the role of the member, and I think both my colleagues will attest that this is the area that I majored on at the board itself prior to this coming this plan being put forward. And it is the role of the member that is key. However, having looked at it backwards, forwards, I can't see any other way of doing it. That's the problem that I have with it. And for the life of me, I can't see anyone around this room tonight has come up with a better way. So all I can do is to look at the way we have, monitor it, see if it does work. If it doesn't work, change it, and change it for the better. That's all we can offer. That's the problem that we have. But what I do know is, having looked at in the time allotted to me, the issues that came up while I was sat on the board, we can't carry on like we carry on, because it's just not tenable. It's not tenable because we're not efficient. And the numbers prove that. Sorry, going back numbers again. However, I think this is the best we've got. But I do think this constant churn that we need to inform each other about our problems, what we see, and how we go about things. I think that's absolutely necessary, because it is a learning exercise, and people in this room are all learning about the way forward, and everyone is just as important as everybody else in that learning process. And I think that's what we need to have in mind all the time. And so therefore, I've listened intently to debate. I should take away 1 or 2 points that's been made tonight, and I'll leave it at that. I just wanted to say that I've been listening. I've not been asleep. Thank you, Margaret. I know, but sometimes I like your jokes, Margaret, but not all the time. So I'll leave it at that, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. Thank you for stealing some of my thunder on that. To say that, yeah, this is the beginning. We want to sort of take this forward, and any comments coming in and not seen as negative of what it's seen as, that's the real feeling, and that's how we go through it. And that's why I wanted to sort of come to committee first. I think one of the other things that we want to take from this is the communication of it is one of the most important things, and that's to the parish councils, that's to the other members as well, and the training that needs to go through that, and the sessions that we may need to look at, so that everybody's views it and knows it as we will become to know it. And the final point is the point we're making, a regular review. We keep looking at this. As I said, we already put it into each planning meeting. Is a review of some of the progress and the processes that are going forward. So that puts that into a cycle as well. So I want to thank everybody for your contributions this evening. I especially want to thank you, Sarah and Louise, for the amount of work, and to a certain extent some of the soul bearing that they've done through this process, going through to get to where we are today, and that will continue, and Tom as well. But yeah, let's move it forward. Let's keep it going. We can't stay where we are. We've got to move forward and we've got to improve it. So thanks again for your time. I will close the meeting shortly, but for those that would like to stay behind and for any further discussions, more than happy to stay along. But for now, I'll close the meeting. Thank everybody. And the meeting closed at 7:19. Thank you very much for your time.